What's going on, Gainz Nation? This is Antoine coming at you live for the first time ever. Um, Obviously, I have a book section when it comes to the Instagram. So if you're not aware of some of the books I've read or reading, go to our Instagram and go ahead under the highlights. I think that's what it's called. We want to make sure we go ahead and check the highlight section, make sure we're seeing um, what is out there, what we're reading when it comes to books. Also, too, I made a post about like, hey, what seems more important when it comes to getting some more health and fitness knowledge to the Gainz Nation itself, other than reading books, making a book public. So maybe like you can read it while Antoine's reading or Roman's reading or whoever's reading it. And then we'll go ahead and maybe give it a month's time and we'll let people, be able to get to rent the book, to buy the book, to listen to it on, Spotify or audiobooks or Audible. Um, and also, too, guys, tip, trick, hints. Um, a lot of the books I read, I don't buy. So I'm not going to go ahead and tell you and suggest you to buy a book right off the shelf because a lot of the times I won't buy a book unless it's something that kind of means something to me personally. But if you want to build your book collection, I'll try to recommend the best when it comes to health and fitness. But back to the point, the only time I actually buy a book is when there's a book that I really, really, really want to keep reading or read again or kind of go back to and revisit. I think the latest book I bought was during Christmas time, like almost 4 months ago now, and that was the Arnold book. Which, if you want to see that review, please let me know. Please comment, DM me, shoot a message, and please tell me like, hey, I want to hear a review on this. A second point on why I wanted to do reviews too is because if you're not wanting to read the book, so some people just don't like to read. A lot of the times, a lot of the information I digest is mostly podcasts from like, top experts in the industry. Um, or we could do some podcast reviews too, because I do listen and watch quite a bit of podcasts. But back to the point is, I wanted to make sure if like, say like, hey, like you out there watching, listening, you don't have time to read, you don't have time to listen to audiobooks, and you don't want to participate in that aspect, but you want to hear the knowledge. I wanted to make a quality content when it comes to making a video, producing a video, and editing it down so you guys know the crisp and clean, kind of like Cliff Notes, right? Like Cliff Notes back when I was in school back in the day when I didn't want to read some books. There was always, Cliff Notes you can purchase online, Cliff Notes that you can see online or read at the library of the book itself. So that's like another interesting point to get out of this video in audio. So make sure if you're like listening, watching, um, make sure if you want to see anything else when it comes to this, um, maybe I can get like versions that are like the Kindle version, and I can broadcast some of the interesting things I find in the book, and I can go ahead and kind of just read through it and give that kind of key aspect of that video, or sorry, of that reading and that content. So if you want to see something like that too, because we do have the power to kind of go ahead and broadcast that stuff. I don't know, unfortunately, I don't know how much I can do of that too, which I'll have to read into because a lot of the times, we want to make sure these authors are getting their investments back. An example of like people purchasing the book, paying for Spotify Premium, paying for Audible so they can get that money captured. Because, they did put a lot of hard work and efforts into these books. So we want to make sure we give the credit to those people, right? We don't want to make sure, we want to make sure it's right and it's, obviously legal too in the nature of YouTube and whatnot to go ahead and make sure we get that right content out to you guys because we don't want to make sure we're lollygagging in this stuff because we put 110% when it comes to effort into these podcasts and these episodes and reviews. And also, too, last but not least, before I get into the review itself, these could be maybe 20 minutes to an hour, depending on the length of how much I want to talk about the subject. Because sometimes if, let's say if there's like a book that, I'm not really too interested in, then I won't spend the time of wasting your time. Maybe I'll give a quick overview, but a lot of the times, like if I read something where it's like, holy cow, like this is going nowhere, or a lot of the audience, like because I think we have a very select audience when it comes to the Gainz podcast, so I want to make sure we're getting to the right audience of our nature of business and our basic culture when it comes to the Gainz podcast. And also, last but not least, I swear, and these I'm going to be handwriting or making some notes on my iPad, just depending on how I'm feeling, because I do have iPad where I can, take the Apple Pencil out. But we want to maybe start trying to interview these authors, especially with this book. I'm very curious to see where Jay's coming from when it comes to the topic of a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, because the way some people might interpret or assume things when it comes to reading this book or listening to it. There's a lot of things out there that could be questionable, could be trying to understand the author, and where Jay Campbell's coming from. So we'll kind of get into things, and I'll kind of start coming from where I'm getting to that point. Want to make sure I get all that information over to you guys in a critical manner, right? So the book for the first review we're going to do is the TOT Bible, or the Testosterone Optimization Therapy Bible by Jay Campbell. It was actually a book that got recommended through Dr. Tyler Saunders. He's been an amazing guest on the podcast, and he's going to be a continued guest, continue work with information to get out to you guys. So he recommended this book because testosterone in men and males is very important when it comes to the overall building a muscle, recovery, mood, feel, sex life, drive, motivation. A lot of things come out of that. So I just want to say that first, because I think a lot of men these days are not paying attention to, or diving into their health a lot like they should be, right? So that's the one important thing about being a man and a male, is you want to make sure you're operating correctly, and on the female side as well too, right? You want to make sure you're operating on this side, but that doesn't particularly, it doesn't come out of this book, and that's like maybe another topic, or maybe something we can revisit when it comes to the female population. So we can always get back to there at a later time, or if you guys have any recommendations, please let me know. So, so I'm gonna go ahead and kind of get into my notes. I might get into a little segment when it comes to these notes, but the first thing um, I want to say about the introduction is, like I said before, like testosterone is very important, and Jay makes it a very big point on operating as a human and as a male specifically, right? Testosterone is the biggest thing to maintain, to keep healthy, and to keep alive. It's something that you always have to take care of. You don't want to ever feel down. You don't want to feel like you're not motivated. You don't want to feel like you're recovering. You want to be building muscle. You don't want to feel like that. So the intro was like perfect. Like, man, like if you are someone who's struggling, um, testosterone wise, or even how the book kind of alludes to like some of those like low testosterone feels or symptoms, um, this is a great book to start. And a lot of the intro is about how, it's like a pandemic, right? It's a pandemic in the sense of there's so much men out there walking around feeling like crap, living like crap, and experiencing it, right? So it's like, they're waking up tired, waking up not being able to be motivated to go to work, do exercise, have a healthy life, be a part of their family. Family is very important to me, especially. It's like, there are not a lot of people, there's a lot of men out there that aren't doing any of those things, and they're thinking it's normal, right? But see, the thing is, it's not normal, and the way society kind of treats this stuff is very, very, very low. a lot of the doctors, unless you're going to a doctor that kind of pays attention to those things, right? Because I'm not going to say that it's every doctor, but a lot of the times, like with my experience, is a lot of the times where I'm making sure my health is in check is me doing the recommendations, and not so much the health provider giving me those recommendations. And that may be a key that where it's like, wait, hey, I need to get someone like Dr. Tyler Sonder who's actually doing those lifestyle changes when it comes to their patients. And I think it's very important and very vital for you to kind of understand that too, especially as a patient. You don't want to always go to visit the doctor when you're sick, right? You want to go to visit the doctor because you might have a list of genetic issues with your heart. So you're trying to figure out how to have a healthy lifestyle where you don't run into any issues with your heart. But those conversations aren't really happening as of today. A lot of those are not happening until something goes wrong. An example, like you get a heart attack and then you're like, oh shit, like I need to change my habits. I need to change my lifestyle to reverse this. But see, the thing is, a lot of the times you need to get ahead of that before that happens so it doesn't happen, right? Wouldn't you rather live in a life where you don't have a heart attack instead of having a heart attack and trying to rebound and reverse your lifestyle choices of your past or previous life? It kind of seems like it's a simple answer, right? But it's not. It's a lot of the times a lot of people kind of revert to their old ways, or they don't want to change their old ways. Like, hey, if sitting on your office desk for 8 hours and then coming home and then eating dinner and then sitting on the couch and watching your favorite Netflix show, that seems like a pretty awesome life. I'm not gonna say like that's a terrible life to live. I mean, you might have a good job, you might do well, then you go home and then you get to watch your favorite TV show, catch up on your show, and then you go to bed and you do it all over, and then you get the weekends off, and then you can do whatever the heck you want. You could sit on watch Netflix for 8 hours at a time instead. So a lot of the times, it's like why would some people do those changes when you have all that sitting right in front of you, right? But I think to the point of that introduction, it's just important to understand like what's going on in your life and as a man and how you're functioning. And you want to make sure you're getting the best out of it. And you want to make sure you're optimizing it through your whole life, not just today. Like you don't want to make sure you want to make sure you're doing things right, like 90% of the time, right? Obviously no one's perfect. Hey, heck, even I like to enjoy a couple beers on the weekends. But like, see, the thing is, if you're doing that every day, every day, every day, not sleeping properly, you know, a lot of these things creep up on you. And just because you're young doesn't mean it can't happen to you when you're younger, right? There's been a lot of people, a lot of patients that, a lot of these terrible things happen to them early on instead of like when they're 50 or 60, which they think that they're going to do. But see, the thing is, people think they can like slide through life, everything's all good, and then boom, it hits you. And then you're like, oh crap, well, I need to start working out 5 days a week, 3 days a week. And I need to start eating not processed foods. I need to stop being so heavy. Well, what did you do for 60 years? That's important too. Um, so I kind of covered a little bit of like the first intro notes that I had. Um, Another thing too we promoted on Gainz Podcast is the importance of blood work. Um, I could tell you this right now, 80 to 90% of my male friends, they don't get blood work every year. Why would you get blood work every year, right? So essentially blood work is the best thing you can potentially get to kind of see how you're doing when it comes to your health, your diet, your lifestyle, your stress levels. So we want to make sure all those are pretty much up to par, every year. Jay Campbell kind of mentions, blood work once a year is all you have to do, until you're, I think it's 40s or after the 40 mark. You maybe want to do it twice a year, every 6 months. And guess what? A lot of the times we've said it here on the podcast. Like me personally, I get blood work done once a year. I want to make sure all my levels are great. So importance of blood work is important. So if you're listening to this today and you're part of that 80 or 90% of the people I know, most of the guys I know, call your doctor or get a doctor and just say, hey, I'm a pretty healthy individual. I don't think anything's wrong, but I want to make sure I pay so much money for insurance. I pay so much money to be able to have these resources, but I'm not utilizing it. Mr. and Mrs. Doctor, I want to make sure I'm doing everything right to make sure I'm living the best life and I keep on this track. Do you even mind if we get a full blood panel? It's not hard. You want to make sure like your full blood panel is being looked at, your testosterone, your hormones are looked at, all that good stuff is being looked at, your blood pressure. So you want to make sure all that's looked at. So I think that's a great point in the beginning of the book. What Jay talks about, and I think blood work has always been important. I can't stress it enough. And then on the other side of that, I think I kind of mentioned it, but besides blood work, you want to understand how you're feeling, right? Just because blood work might have like some positive numbers, but you still feel like crap, you feel like you're unmotivated, you're not getting enough sleep. There might be some underlying issues in your lifestyle today that you're doing where it's like, you might not be getting the best out of your life. So Jay goes over a lot of those symptoms like, low mood, low sex drive, low motivation. Um, you're putting on body fat. You're not being able to build lean muscle mass. And those are important when it comes to staying healthy and living a long life. So make sure just because you look at the blood work and you're getting those records, you're understanding your records, you're going over it with a doctor, you want to make sure you're understanding how you're feeling and making sure you're still at 110%. You don't want to be at 40%, 50%. You want to be at 100 and plus percent. You want to make sure you're feeling 100% all the time or most of the time, right? Um, Another good thing is in chapter 5. I think that's probably one of my favorite things about this book is chapter 5 it's all about the biology role of testosterone in men. So if you don't really know too much about the role of testosterone in men, Jay goes over a great amount of resources, definitions, and study on what the role of testosterone does in the male body. So make sure, like you're reading chapter 5, you're listening to it. I think that's a great way to understand a little bit more about what makes men men and what makes you feeling 100%. So I think chapter 5 was actually one of my favorites. And if you're like I said, if you're someone who doesn't understand right now, or you understand some, or you understand a lot, go ahead and listen and read that one either once or twice, because I think that's a great one. Um, and I mentioned the low test symptoms earlier in the beginning about low mood, low motivation, sex drive is low, lean body mass is hard to build, fat mass is easy to build. Um, and then after chapters 5, 6, it gets a little bit wild, and it was I'm alluding to like what I said in the beginning, because a lot of this book I kind of didn't know too much going into it, didn't know too much about Jay Campbell and his team and the TOT side of doctors and the whole you know the whole understanding of the TOT thing. So I went into it kind of thinking like, we're going to talk about what testosterone is, why it's a pandemic in men today, and we're going to get into what are the awesome ways we can go ahead and change our lifestyle today. And this is where it gets a little bit wild. So, after chapter 6, then Jay talks about non-injectable testosterone boosters or testosterone applications, right? When it comes to like oral, nasal sprays, gels, and he talks about those test rising applications that are non-injectables. So again, that's when I think it gets a little bit wild because the fact that maybe a mention of the two non-injectable injectables would be cool. But I think, again, from a person that understands the Gainz Nation, the Gainz audience. I don't. I mean, yes, that's a solution, right? But and this is why I want to interview him and kind of understand where he's coming from. When we talked about, and then he talks about injectables in chapter 8. A lot of the different liquids and forms you can inject in your body that are testosterone applications that are injectables. A lot of that, like I said, I want to understand, that, like I said, that is the last, 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 last application of building your testosterone and your hormone levels. I understand where he's coming from because sometimes people can't balance their hormones efficiently and effectively. So they do have to rely on non-injectables or injectables. But see, the thing is, and he goes over it too, right? He goes over budget. He goes over the effectiveness. Obviously, the effectiveness in non-injectables are a lot worse than the injectables. Injectables goes right into the bloodstream. It gets, easily digested in the body, and there's a lot of, there's a better bounce back when it comes to building those hormone levels appropriately, right? But he goes over budget. He goes over like, hey, it's not cheap, and like a lot of people think like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna go on TRT and experience all these like benefits and all these positives, and then so they realize that it's like it could be $100 to $300 a month. Some people don't have that budget. Some people, 100 or 300, that's a lot of money for people. Also, too, guess what? I don't think he mentions it in the book. Is once you get to to a point when it comes to injecting or applying testosterone uh, through a non-injectable, there's a certain point where your testes cannot produce testosterone anymore biologically. A lot of the times when guys have double testicular cancer and they have to remove their testes, unfortunately, they have to do that for the rest of their lives. Like, okay, cool, they got the cancer out, but now, unfortunately, they can't produce testosterone anymore. It's just a simple biology of a male. And same thing with someone who has the ability that have testes. They can produce testosterone as long as they're living that healthy lifestyle and they're doing those lifestyle changes. So, like I said, I'm just assuming at this point. Don't know if that's like the total be all end all where he's coming from, but when it comes to building your testosterone and your hormones effectively, you want to make sure you're doing everything that you can do to effectively improve your hormone balance or imbalance, I should say. You want to sleep, you want to hydrate, eat properly, work out hard, train hard. You want to, be less. You want to be lean, less body fat, but you want to go ahead and make sure you're doing all those. Yes, it's great to have that information, and he goes into really deep he goes into 4 types of injectables in this book. And a lot of people, like I know Gainz Nation, we don't talk too much about it, but like, obviously I've been reading up and digesting all this information before reading this book. So I knew quite a bit or some of this stuff, but there's a lot to balance on each sides. So think about like when you're, at a park and you're playing on the teeter totter, the one person who's heavier is going to raise a teeter totter all the way up. So if it's like, if you're raising that testosterone all the way up, your estrogen levels, your other examples of hormone balancing levels, they might be down too. So you might be experiencing things um, that you might not want to experience as well, right? So it's like a lot of those things, like you don't want to do that stuff unless it's your last straw. And I've been stressing on it. I made a couple posts on it before, and this is before reading the book. But there's a lot of influencers that are just promoting the wonderful benefits of TRT and HRT, and no one's ever talking about like, once you're on it and you go too far, you have to be on it forever. So you have to make that adult decision. You want to make sure you're, talking to everybody, talking to, maybe an endocrinologist as well, like a specialist where they specialize in those hormone levels. So you're not doing the wrong thing. just because, one person says like if it feels good, you feel great, you're gonna do wonderful things, then, like, what's the whole point of this, right? You want to optimize your whole life and your lifestyle. Um, and I'm 29, closing on 29 this week. The point of this recording, but last time I got my testosterone levels, I was in the 800s, and the high of that scale is like almost 1,000. It's like in the 900s. So just because, and I'm all natural. I don't take any injectables. I don't take any hormone pills or injectables. But like the fact that some people kind of just give in and give up. That's not the thing we're promoting here on the podcast, and like the way we promote health and fitness. So, like I said, that's why I want to get him on the horn. I want to make sure we're understanding him and where he's coming from. So we want to make sure we're looking at everything. Um, and yeah, and then the next following chapter, I think 9, is he goes over the side effects. Kind of like that balancing act. You have to balance all these things. You have to balance that estrogen. If you raise testosterone so high, then what about your estrogen levels? Um, and then he goes over like hair loss and the importance of like, would you rather have higher testosterone than hair? You know, I get that to a point. Like, obviously, I don't really have hair and I don't really care personally, but yes, living a healthier lifestyle and feeling better, definitely you would probably think that's more important, but it's not to some people, and some people just don't care. But he goes over like hair loss, but like I said, some of that stuff happens though when you're in such a different balancing. If you're in balance quite a bit, then the DHT levels in your hair follicles are just not going to match up. So that's why you see a lot of like bodybuilders that are bald, because their hormones are so imbalanced for so long, where they just potentially permanently lose their hair. Some people obviously know how to manage that, or some people have the genetics around that, which helps a lot too. But you never know when it comes to these things. And then, like I said, the second half of the book goes wild. He goes in like the gyno and this, how to effectively eliminate gyno and like what gyno is, and like something like that. Like unless you're like unfortunately heavily obese when you're like a kid or when you're younger, that could kind of sit with you forever. But if you did not, and then you're using injectable hormones or application on non-injectable hormones, gyno can come up too, just like kind of like the hair loss. So you're experiencing that fat tissue by your nipples, when a healthy individual or person that has a lean body, they're not going to most likely experience that, because the fact that they're not imbalancing their hormones like these people heavily using, or when you come to the obesity to a lesser weight club, um, then you'll experience it as well. So yeah, I mean, it's good. He promotes a doctor that does plastic surgery, and for someone like you, if you're experiencing that, and if it builds confidence in your life, and it will make you feel like a better person, it'll make you look better, like if that makes you think you look better with your shirt off, and you care about that, then yeah, please go through with all the measures you want, right? It's not going to hurt. It's like a small surgery. You don't really go under. You just get like local anesthesia, and they pretty much remove the fatty cells around your nipples, and then you just heal for like a month. So it's like, it's not a big deal, but it could cost money depending on where the plastic surgeon is. And then you also have to find out if they have credibility, right? Um, and then like towards the end, he goes over um, like qualities of food, like macronutrients, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and then insulin levels and how to control them. We've talked about in the past, like especially with carbs, fats, proteins, macros are always important. He goes over like the body types and which body types could have potentially higher insulin levels or lower insulin levels to carbohydrates with complex or not high complex carbs, which you could believe, can't believe. Like we said in the past, genetics plays a big part. Your exercise plays a big part. Like if you're a CrossFit athlete compared to like a bodybuilder compared to a powerlifter, a lot of those three individuals will definitely need different kinds of diets. And also too, like he said in the book, is like you'll have to try different types of macronutrients to understand like what you feel better on. Like if you feel better on high carbohydrates and moderate fats, cool. If you feel better on higher fats, low carbohydrates, or moderate carbohydrates, cool. And that's always important, right? You want to make sure you're understanding what works for you. He goes over like people think carbohydrates are the devil. You should know they're not. Carbohydrates are one of the best macronutrients for the fast energy delivery system. He does go over like some like fruits and like how there's just these certain fruits that will have the best like contents for you. In like fructose levels, I honestly don't believe that stuff because fructose and that will go ahead and digest in your body differently. Like says like 50 grams of fructose will set you off the wheel. Not really. I mean, there's been days where I used to eat like half of a watermelon, and believe me, I was like, it was when I was training for the marathon. I'm pretty sure I had like a 4 pack or a 6 pack. And I was very lean, very strong, recovering really well. So it just depends on your body and how you handle fructose, but don't let those numbers scare you. And also, too, don't ever think a low fat or low carb diets are always the best for everybody, right? Because those are two different wheels. Remember, make sure protein is always something that you consume with all your meals to help digest, help recover, help build muscle, help restore your body, and also it's just a balancing act. So you don't want to obviously if you eat a surplus, you're going to be gaining weight, being overweight, and all that stuff. If you're in a deficit, you're going to be in you might be losing muscle if you're not eating enough protein, but you'll be losing fat if you lose fat, you might lose some muscle if you're eating enough protein. So it's always that balancing act, right? So want to make sure that's out there. And then at the end of the book, he goes over like the conclusions, a lot of the reenactments of the previous chapters, and how like you should make sure you're sleeping, getting enough sunlight, hydrating, eating those macronutrients, making sure you're exercising hard, making sure you're sleeping well, and all that stuff. So that was a pretty good lengthy review. I think I'm gonna stop there. There's probably a bunch more I can get into, but if you do like this content, you want to see more of this content, please let me know. We definitely do love the critiques, the feedback. If you want to see it in different style, like I said, if I could broadcast some notes, or some link some studies or link some people that might have a little bit more better way of explaining things, let us know. We appreciate the feedback, and please like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you on the next one. Peace, Gainz Nation.